it ended up not being a difficult negotiation, although I remember in 2019, there was an artificial deadline set, start of the offseason program for Russell Wilson's last contract with the Seahawks. Here's George Payton, the Broncos GM from yesterday. It's pretty clear that there was an artificial deadline, presumably week 1 or the practice week in advance of the Seahawks game, that was put in place to get this contract done. Have a listen to George Payton.
I did feel pressure. It came down to the wire last night. We had a deadline, and I felt we would figure it out, but you never know. We've never done a deal together, and Mark's tough. And Rich is tough. So you're like, how's this going to work? And him and I kept talking, but we're not. We're like, we could have done the deal together, but we had two tough negotiators, and so I went home last night. And, it was like 11:30, and I hadn't heard anything, and I fell asleep because, a couple nights ago we had the wire, the cut, the waiver wire was out, and we were up all night. So I fell asleep, and then the phone rang. I don't know what time, maybe 11:45, and it was a FaceTime. It was Russ and Sierra, and I couldn't figure out the phone, so I lost them. And I was like, were they going to ask for more money? What are they doing? And so they called again. I answered, and it was one of the best phone calls I've ever received, to see Sierra and Russ, and even Mark was on the call. And pretty cool stuff, and I'll remember that. That's the best deal and the best I felt after a deal.
Mark is Mark Rogers, the agent for Russell Wilson. Rich, who was mentioned earlier in the clip, is Rich Hurtado, a former agent who is the negotiator with the Broncos. And it came down to Rich Hurtado and Mark Rogers battling it out. And it sounds like the deadline, Peter, was Wednesday night at midnight Mountain Time. He said we came right down to it. So they were there. And deadlines do spur action. Artificial deadlines don't always work. They made that artificial deadline work, and my guess is if they hadn't gotten it done, that's it. No contract this year. We'll see you after the season. And to your point earlier, it was only going to get more expensive after the season. I think at the end of the day, when you look at this contract, 5 years, $245 million, not nearly all of it guaranteed fully, which, as you said, and we need to talk about that some more, does tip the scales further toward the owners as it relates to this question of how much guarantee will be in quarterback contracts. But I think it came down to they made Russell Wilson an offer he wouldn't refuse. That, there's what you want if everything's perfect, and then there's what you get and what you take because you can't say no to it. It makes him the second highest paid player in the NFL, just a little bit behind Aaron Rodgers in new money. And yes, it's a 7-year commitment. And yes, from signing, it's $42.2 million. And yes, there's a chance it's going to be rendered obsolete in 3 or 4 years. I see so many of these quarterbacks, Peter, who do the long-term deals now, and they just assume they'll take care of me when everything goes out of whack with the market. And we'll see if that happens, because Patrick Mahomes is getting close to the point where they need to take care of him again. He is slipping farther and farther down the list, and it's becoming conspicuous already, just a couple of years after he did his deal. Will the Cardinals do that with Kyler Murray if it happens? Will the Broncos do it with Russell Wilson if it happens? That's part of the gamble that Russell Wilson is taking, but there's a certain confidence that the player has in knowing that the team will do it because you don't want your franchise quarterback to be pissed off. So you make the long-term commitment. You get $160 million fully guaranteed as a practical matter at signing. The real guarantee is less than that, but as a practical matter, it's $161 million over 4 years. And if further contracts make it look bad in comparison, Russell Wilson, I think, is confident the Broncos will rip up this one and give him another one.
Mike, there's two things about just the way the contract went that really struck me. Number one was the simple fact that in quarterback contractology, the number that has come to matter the most, honestly, is the guaranteed money for a very simple reason. And look, these people are not cutting Russell Wilson. Even if there were 2 disastrous years, he's not getting cut. Okay, so the guaranteed money to me shouldn't be as much of a factor that it has become with quarterbacks, especially. Like, when Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert sign their contracts, nobody is going to be saying, gee, I hope they got a lot of guaranteed money because Mike Brown could cut Joe Burrow in 2 years. Are you out of your mind? I mean, that's not going to happen. And I think it's the same thing with Wilson. But the point is, I believe that the Broncos had to draw a line in the sand at some point about the guaranteed money in this contract. And they said, look, we're not cutting this guy, but you also know that we're not going to do a Jimmy Haslam. And we're not even going to come close to Jimmy Haslam. And if it comes down to that, okay, then play the year. I believe that was part of the line drawn in the sand, the guaranteed money. And I think the one other thing about this, Mike, is that I think even though Mark Rodgers will always wear the black hat in Seattle, from the organization and from fans who think that, that he helped drive Russell Wilson out of town. He'll always wear he is a pragmatist. He is not a hostage taker. That's my experience watching him operate over the years. I think he knows how to make a deal, even though deals with him are difficult to get sometimes. But to me, I think both the guarantee and the fact that Denver had to know that they had an agent to work with who is going to be really tough, because Mark Rodgers is tough, but he's also not going to say, okay, throw this all out the window. It was clear when it was done that Russell Wilson wanted this done now, and they got it done now.
Well, and I think part of the problem in Seattle was the Seahawks made the process of getting Russell Wilson paid as difficult as pulling teeth. So Mark Rodgers decided, fine, give me some pliers and I'll start pulling some teeth, if that's what it's going to be. Both times he got a contract, it was entering the final year of his prior one. So there's an enhanced urgency and this sense that the Seahawks deliberately dragged their feet and waited too long. And now the pressure is on everyone to get this done. If the Broncos are willing to be reasonable and come to the table and put a package out there that Russell Wilson couldn't say no to, then Mark Rodgers isn't going to be as aggressive as he was in Seattle. If you feel like the person you're negotiating with is being fair and reasonable and is ready to move and not twisting it all up into something that is taking way too long and causing a lot of stress and frustration for everyone involved, you have a more reasonable, you have a more peaceful process of working things out. I think that's where that flows from fundamentally. And the point about guaranteed contracts, I'm glad you made that, because Sims and I have danced around this from time to time, but I don't know that I've ever really said it as plainly and clearly as I want to. For true franchise quarterbacks, it doesn't matter if the contract's guaranteed because they're not leaving. They are getting every penny of that contract. The only guy that I think needs to worry about it is Lamar Jackson, who is apparently worried about it, because if you suddenly can't, because of an accumulation of injuries or one really big injury, if you suddenly can't play, they will find a way to move on. If Russell Wilson would have 2 or 3 just down years and they ultimately decide that it's not the offense, it's not the supporting cast, it's not the coach, it's not this, it's not that, it's him, you start thinking about your alternatives. But I think there's a confidence on both sides that's not going to happen with Russell Wilson. And usually with a franchise quarterback, both sides have a high degree of confidence that it's going to continue to work. I think one of the reasons why Lamar Jackson has it in his head that he wants that fully guaranteed deal, he knows at some level over the next 6 years, because he's got 1 year left on his current contract, there's a chance he becomes Cam Newton. Cam Newton never had one huge, catastrophic, how's he ever going to play again injury. It was a shoulder. It was a foot. It was, the shoulder's still not right. I got to change my throwing motion. It was this. It was that. And then all of a sudden, he just isn't the guy he used to be. That's what could happen to Lamar Jackson. I think that's why he's pushing for a fully guaranteed deal. But that's the difference, because for franchise quarterbacks, it doesn't need to be fully guaranteed, except when you play the position the way Lamar Jackson does, maybe you need to have that full guarantee.
I can see that to some degree, Mike, but I believe that if Lamar Jackson, and I don't know what he's asking for in this weird Byzantine, bizarre contract negotiation, non-negotiation, friendly, unfriendly, call from mom to Eric DaCosta. I mean, we don't know what's going on, but I'll just make one point about this. If he wants a fully guaranteed contract, just my opinion, I just don't think he's going to get it in Baltimore. At the risk of saying, okay, play it out, franchise him, double franchise him the next year, and then just let him go, whatever, however it works. I just don't think that Steve Bisciotti would ever sign off on a fully guaranteed $250 million contract. I just don't see it. I think, I'm not saying it's impossible, but I think it is highly, highly unlikely. So I think there's going to have to be a bridge built if that is indeed what Lamar Jackson will want, or what his mom will want, or what the NFLPA would push him to do. But as of now, I don't see it happening.
And I agree with you, but before I elaborate on that, I have to point out that our friend Todd sent an email early in the segment saying, now that Peter is back, will we get a Greek mythology reference or an English professor vocabulary word first? And Byzantine is the winner. So we got the English professor word before the Greek mythology reference, so Todd got his answer before we even got to 7:30 a.m. Eastern.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.